I have just gotten off a 4 hour. But remember a couple days ago how I said I was not ready to talk about Dan Wooten? It is time. The allegations against Dan Wooten, are gaining legs and making their way into major publications like The Guardian. I feel like I have something to add to the story. I feel like I can pull together some threads that we have. Now, the juiciest stuff, including my conspiracy theory, is going to be reserved for my Patreon, okay? I gotta have some lines. I also really don't want to get sued. Dan's got good lawyers. But first we need to go back to when Dan Wooten was a baby criminal. Allegedly. Here he is giving testimony at the 2012 Levinson inquiry into phone hacking because he worked for News of the World. He would then move on to The Sun, which is also a Murdoch-owned entity. News of the World was in a bit of hot water over phone hacking, blackmail, all sorts of totally ethical ways to get stories. Cool. I read some of Dan's testimony on the plane, and I want to pull out a little bit of it. He says he was assured that following the conviction of News of the World's royal correspondent Clive Goodman in early 2007, that it was an individual incident. He claims there was no bullying culture at News of the World. He believes he sometimes took a more cautious approach than other people at News of the World. He's asked whether Wooten felt like he was colluding with celebrities to put stories with a certain angle out. At the time, he was a celebrity editor. He obviously replied no and said his stories were built on trust that the celebrities would be treated fairly. It's comedy hour. Anyway, so remember, when Dan is in his infancy stage of evil, he is working for News of the World. Then there is this story that comes out in 2020. Remember, in January of that year, Dan Wooten had broken the story that Harry and Meghan were stepping back, which is unbelievable information to get unless you have a source or know someone in Prince Charles's camp or Prince William's camp. A whistleblower comes out and claims that there are payments for stories that went to a freelance publicist whose partner is a palace aide. Many people believe this to be Christian Jones as the freelancer and Jason Knopf as the palace aide to William and Kate at the time. So now we have Dan Wooten working for News of the World, not involved in the crime, and then we have this exclusive, which he denies, which is cash for briefings. Although I still don't see any other plausible way that he got that Harry and Meghan story. And then we get to this 3 years in the making investigation into Dan Wooten. It's from Byline Times, and to be honest, a lot of people who work here are like journalism vigilantes after having been involved in some of the phone hacking. Full disclosure, Dan Evans got in trouble for phone hacking. I think it's just really important to put that out there. It seems like Byline Times and their journalists are trying to right the wrongs of the past and prevent these things from happening in the future. Over the last couple days, there have been some former partners of Dan's, including a longtime partner named Alex, who have come out publicly and discussed their allegations against Dan Wooten. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is a trigger warning. These men describe heinous abuse. But what's also in this article are other allegations. And what comes out of the article are some patterns of blackmailing, extortion, paying for photographs, etc. And if this is all true, it would conform to a pattern we have seen from Dan Wooten in the way he works. For example, he targeted one man pretending to be a woman on Facebook to get photos from this individual. After a while, the individual deduced it was Dan, messaged to say, "I know who you are," and the profile was quickly deleted. He also allegedly had an alter ego named Martin Branning. According to Byline Times, they handed a 28-page dossier of evidence to the Metropolitan Police on June 20th, 2023. So this work has been in the making for quite some time. This is not just a knee-jerk reaction to the recent social media allegations. And then there are these explosive claims from his former partner. His partner claims that he was flat-sitting for Wooten in 2013 while he was visiting family, and he found a padlocked hold-all concealed behind the washing machine. Inside, there was an external hard drive, secretly filmed video of an employee of The Sun engaged in sexual activity with their partner, etc. Now, my first question was, why would this padlock hold-all not be locked? Or did it have a password that the partner could have guessed? Or did he just hope because it was behind a washing machine that it was all good? I do have questions about that. But here's the other thing Alex alleges that I think is important. He alleges that Wooten gained unauthorized access to his social media accounts and email, leading him to suspect that he was being stalked. The intrusion became evident when Mr. Truby, that's Alex, found his Gmail account was being accessed from an IP address at the News of the World office, where Wooten was employed at the time. Now, this may be slightly different, but in the business, they call that blagging. When you were able to get into someone's personal accounts, get all their information, it's known as blagging. It's what The Sun, where Wooten previously worked before going over to the Daily Mail and then GB News, did to Meghan Markle. But they got around a loophole by hiring an American investigator to do it. It's in a documentary. I'll look it up later. And then today, The Guardian runs with this. Jim Watterson, the author of the piece, says, "Slip into my DMs. No, I mean it." Martin Branning has been on a lot of people's radar for many years. And that's because Martin was targeting scores of men in the journalism industry, oftentimes heterosexual men, to gain blackmail on them. So Dan Wootton has not been on his show on GB News for a little bit. And he actually was on holiday in New Zealand visiting family. But then he came back on air and he addressed these allegations in a very hypocritical Dan fashion. We are going to watch a little bit of it. I apologize. I am not going to be able to control my facial expressions.
And as a journalist, I feel uncomfortable being the story. But I've always promised you that this show has no spin and no bias and no censorship. So I owe it to you to address this. As you probably don't know, hopefully you don't know, because you're not insane enough to pay attention to the cesspit of social media, these past few days I have been the target of a smear campaign by nefarious players with an axe to grind. Notably by an ex-partner who I was, and this is something I've never spoken about and it's very difficult to talk about publicly, but who I was previously abused by, and who has been on a campaign to destroy my life. In the past, he has written to me confessing to being a, quote, psychopath.
He sounds pretty nervous. He is going the DARVO route. Stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And he just called his ex-partner a psychopath on a pretty large TV station. I wonder if his partner can sue. Anyway.
I, like all fallible human beings, have made errors of judgment in the past. But the criminal allegations being made against me are simply untrue.
Who hasn't made a mistake? It's a curious line. I'm not sure why it was necessary. And obviously he says his lawyers advise no comment. He only addresses one allegation, though. But I think we've seen a pattern of behavior with Dan Wootton in his professional and allegedly personal life that is worth exploring, especially for the victims. They deserve justice. They deserve to be heard. And I'm going to end with what always bothers me about Dan Wootton, especially after these allegations, which are threatening and violent and inexcusable. Dan Wootton is a TERF. He's a gay man that goes after the most vulnerable people in his community. Hate-filled gender lobby. The gender extremism sweeping into schools through a wave of woke tyranny is now putting child welfare in danger. The cancel mob going after J.K. Rowling. And for all the extremism and fear-mongering and danger that he puts out into the world, placing it again on some of the most vulnerable people among us, when it appears that, perhaps, the only thing extreme and dangerous is Dan Wootton himself. If you want to hear me go in depth into Dan Wootton and also talk about a conspiracy theory I have, head over to patreon.com/MeredithConstant. The link is in the bio. That audio episode will drop this week.